Hello everybody, and welcome to viewing a list of Christmas presents using Azure Data Engineering Services, which is my Festive Tech Calendar contribution for this year. Now, everybody knows our list of Christmas presents can get pretty big, even more so when you realize just how many people in the world write these lists. So, how do you read the list of all these presents if they're stored in a text-based file, such as CSV or parquet? Well, in this video, I will show you a couple of ways that you can do this using a couple of Azure Data Engineering services. And along the way, I'm going to show you one way that you can make sure that nobody's presents are forgotten by introducing Delta Lakes. Now, it's worth noting here that those of you who do not celebrate Christmas can still learn a couple of things by watching this video. So enjoy! Just a bit about this year's Festive Tech Calendar before we dive into things. This year's Festive Tech Calendar is raising money for the charity Missing People, which helps find vulnerable people and reunite them with their families. Now, you can donate to this by following the Just Giving page link that's on the Festive Tech Calendar site. So if I scroll down, you can see the link for it here. Now, a lot of us community professionals are taking the time to present you with great technical detail for this event, so please give generously. Now, in addition to this, there's also a supporters page on the Festive Tech Calendar site, which I can show you here. If you scroll down, you can see there are actually a couple of prizes that you can win this year, including an Elgato Stream Deck and a Festive Lego set. So it's worth looking on that page on the website. Anyway, a bit about myself before we go any further in the video. My name's Kevin Chant. I'm a manager at Avanard in the Netherlands. However, as some of you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. However, I live in the Netherlands due to the fact my wife is Dutch. So basically, I'm an Englishman living in the Netherlands because he met a woman in Australia. Now, if you kept up with that, you're in a good place for this video. Now, I've worked in IT since the days of Windows 95, and that's probably as much as I should say about that. Over the years, I've had experience in various sectors, including the banking, oil and health insurance industries. Over that time, I've gained various certifications. And in addition to that, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and what is known as a dual category MVP because I have awards for both data platform and developer technologies. Now you can find me online in quite a few different places. I'm on Twitter at Kev Chant. I'm on a couple of other sites with the same handle as well. My LinkedIn has a user-friendly URL. I have my own blog where I post a lot about the data platform and developer technologies. Quite often I post about both together. And I have my own GitHub site as well, which contains some templates that people can use to do things such as CI/CD for Azure Synapse SQL pools. So if you're interested in that area, it's worth looking at them. So in this session, I'll cover creating the list of Christmas presents that are stored in Azure Data Lake storage, like you can see in the diagram here. However, I just want to quickly cover how the list of Christmas presents can end up in Azure Data Lake storage. For example, it could well be that the letters have been sent either by post or up through a chimney over to Santa's helpers, who then scan all the letters received to get a list of all the presents out and put into a data source to be consumed. Of course, these days, children can also send an email over with the list of presents what they want. Plus, in these modern times, they can also enter all of the presents they want into a website as well. So these are three potential types of data sources. And once those data sources exist, they can then be consumed by a service such as Azure Synapse Analytics pipelines to then be loaded and transformed into Azure Data Lake Storage for use. Now, of course, you don't necessarily have to use the pipelines in Azure Synapse Analytics here. You could use another service. For example, you could use Azure Data Factory if that is what you're more comfortable with. Anyway, let's now look into how you can actually create a list of presents that are received in text-based files using Azure Databricks. Now, one layout that Santa and his helpers might use once they've ingested all of the data into Azure Data Lake Storage is one where all the data ends up in a raw container. Now, as you can see here, there are multiple folders to represent different countries. And if I navigate further into one of these folders and I click on CSV, you can see there are multiple CSV folders in a particular folder. And each of these, as you can probably guess by the name, represents a city. Now, before we go any further, one thing I want to point out is that the majority of the data that you will see in this video is actually based on two public datasets that are available in Kaggle. In particular, this one and this one. Anyway, first I'm going to show you how you can query the contents of the CSV or parquet files that are in Azure Data Lake Storage using Azure Databricks. So, before we go too far into running code within a particular notebook, just want to highlight in Azure Databricks, behind the scenes it uses Spark clusters to query the contents of files. Of course, it's also used for a lot of other work as well. So all the work isn't actually being done by Azure Databricks itself, it's done by the clusters that it creates behind the scenes, like I've done here. So once you've created a cluster, you can then specify it within your notebook, as you can see here. Anyway, let's go through now and see how Santa and his helpers can potentially query CSV files using Azure Databricks. So in this particular notebook, I'm just going to run this code to make sure it uses a database I created in Azure Databricks. And then I'm first going to show you how you can create one particular CSV file using Python. Now, I will be showing some Python in this video, however the majority of the code will be based on SQL. And that is because I appreciate the fact that a lot of people watching this video would have a SQL related background. So, I'm just going to first of all query the Bristol CSV file. And once that's returned the results, I can show you them all here. And you can effectively do the same using a SQL select statement, as you can see here. So if I run this code, for example, it will return the contents of the same CSV file. However, you may want to do it a bit neater. So what you can actually do using SQL and Databricks is create a table that's based on the contents of that CSV file. And then once that's done, I can run a select statement against that table. And then behind the scenes, it will go off and get the data from the CSV. Now, as you can probably imagine, this isn't very efficient. So what Santa and his helpers will probably end up doing instead is actually creating tables based on multiple CSV files, like you can see here. So I'm just going to do that now. So it basically will be based on all the CSV files in the United Kingdom subfolder. And then I can create the table that's been created. And I can actually create views based on this table as well. So for example, if you want to make sure that only certain cities were included, you could have a where clause in your view to represent that. And there are other reasons you want to create views on top of the table as well. For example, when you're looking to cleanse the data. And then we can check to make sure that only those cities that we put in the where clause are actually in the view, or returned by the view, I should say. Now, there is also a naughty list included with this because, of course, Santa only wants to deliver presents to children who have been nice. So, I am going to create the table now based on the CSV. And then we're going to create a view based on the contents of the table, which we will use later on in this video. Right, so now let's have a look and see what else we can do within Azure Databricks. So, to make things more optimized, Santa and his helpers might actually decide to use parquet files instead of CSV files, which are basically highly compressed text-based files. So for example, as you may have noticed earlier, all of the CSV files were around 9 meg in size, and in reality the parquet files that are created are a lot smaller. And there are other advantages to using parquet files as well. And I'll show you now how you can effectively query them using Azure Databricks. So again, for this particular notebook, I'm just going to make sure it uses the same database. And then, just like I showed you with CSV files, I'm going to show you how you can query the various compressed parquet files that are in the Bristol folder. So this will basically return the same results as you saw when we queried the CSV file earlier. Now, verify this by counting the number of rows. However, just like with CSV, just querying the parquet files for Bristol would not be very efficient for Santa and his helpers, so they'd probably want to create a data frame in Python that contains all of the data that's within the parquet files for the United Kingdom, and of course they would want to do the same for all the other countries for efficiency purposes, because during the Christmas period Santa has to travel through a lot of time zones. Now, you can query individual folders that contain the parquet files using a SQL select statement as well. So for example, this will get all the parquet files for Bristol. And you can also create a table based on the contents of the parquet file as well. And we can do a count, and you can see it's the same number of rows as we returned earlier when we did a similar thing using Python. Now, again, that might not be very efficient for Santa and his helpers, so you'll probably want to create a table based on all the parquet files for the United Kingdom, and of course the other countries as well. So this particular query creates a table which will contain all of the data relating to the United Kingdom. And we can verify the results here. Now, once the table is based on parquet files has been created, we can use describe detail to get various information about it, including the location of the table we have created. Now, just like I showed you earlier on the table that was based on CSV files, you can also create a view on top of the table that's based on parquet files. So I'll quickly do that for a couple of cities that are in Scotland. And of course, Santo's helpers will probably want to create a view on top of all the cities it has listed for the United Kingdom as well, and of course for all the other countries. And creating views on top of the tables that have been created can be very useful in various situations, including when you're looking to cleanse the tables. And this will be particularly useful for Santa and his helpers because, of course, they don't want to give children duplicate presents. And I'm just going to check to make sure that the view works. And there you go. So, I just want to show you one final thing in Azure Databricks. Now, it's all well and good being able to query the raw data that's been stored in the CSV and parquet files. However, if you want to keep in line with the new data lakehouse paradigm, we probably want to extract and cleanse the data that's in the raw files and move them to another location. And the best way to store that cleansed data is to use what is known as a Delta Lake. Now, a Delta Lake uses the parquet file format, however, it also includes a logging system. And for those who have a SQL Server background, you can think of this logging conceptually a bit like a SQL Server transaction log. However, in reality, it is different. Now, the main reason you would use a Delta Lake is to make sure that your transactions keep what is known as the ACID properties. So that's atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. And I can actually show you how a Delta Lake looks now. Because using a Delta Lake will ensure that we don't lose any Christmas presents. Plus, we can also cleanse the data to make sure that Santa doesn't deliver any duplicate presents to anybody. So, I'm just creating this table that's going to be based on the Delta format, and I'm going to partition by city. Now, partitioning is a good thing to do for Delta Lakes because it can introduce a performance improvement. Now, once I've created the table, I can actually insert the contents of a view that I created earlier in the video into the table using the insert statement. And then once that's completed, I can just query the table to make sure that the insert worked. And then to check that it's definitely using Delta, I can use the describe extended statement. So if I scroll further down in these results, it will basically show me that it's using Delta and that it's an extended table. Now, we can actually query the location where the files used for the Delta Lake are stored. So if we query it now and I scroll down, you will see that there is a different folder for each city, and that represents the partitioning that we set up earlier. Now, you may remember that I actually created a view which contained a list of everybody who was naughty or nice. And we can actually use this view to remove everybody that was naughty from the list of people who are due to get presents. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. For example, we can use the delete statement, or we can use merge. Now, for the benefit of this video, I'm going to use merge just so you get an idea of the capabilities of it. So basically what this merge statement is saying, that if anybody in the new data table happens to also be on the list as being naughty, then we're removing them. And as you can see, there's quite a few people who have been naughty. And we can then query the data table just to verify that they've definitely been removed. And as you can see, we've dropped to a lower number. Now, we can use the describe history statement to see what's happened so far in the data lake. So basically, the latest version is the merge statement we've just run. But what about if we want to see how it was before we did the merge statement? Well, that is completely possible by doing what's called time travel. So here I've got a time travel statement based on SQL, and all I'm saying is version as of number, and I'm going to change that to 2. So we can see what the count was before we ran the merge command. And as you can see, it returns the same number because I should have actually put 1 instead of 2. So it does highlight that there is a difference in numbers though. So you can see it's jumped from just over 400,000 to just over 600,000. Now, as you probably already know, Santa is very keen to have a naughty list. So we can actually create a table for him that can contain the naughty list. Again, using delta and partition by city. And then we can insert based on the results of the view for where the naughty or nice column equals naughty. So there you go. In this particular section, I've shown you how you can use a data lake to have a nice consistent list of all the presents that need to be delivered, and also how to generate the naughty list for Santa. Now, one final thing I want to cover is how you can query the CSV and parquet files using Azure Synapse Analytics. And the first thing I want to cover is the fact that just like in Azure Databricks, you can also work with Spark clusters to get the data in Azure Synapse Analytics as well. So for example here, you can create a notebook and specify which Spark cluster you want to use with it to query the data like I have done here, as you can see below. Now, there are some differences between the syntax and the features that you can use in the Spark clusters in Azure Synapse Analytics as opposed to Azure Databricks. However, because they are so similar, I'm not going to go through and repeat all of the code that I showed you earlier in Azure Databricks. However, I will show you in Azure Synapse Analytics how you can query the files using serverless SQL pools. Now, in Azure Synapse Analytics, you have 2 types of SQL pools. You have dedicated SQL pools, which you tend to use for long-term storage, for example, a data warehouse. And then you have serverless SQL pools, which you tend to spin up for ad hoc queries or exploratory purposes. And because they are based on, because the pools are based on SQL Server, you can actually use the same T-SQL syntax that you use in SQL Server. Of course, there are limitations depending on which of the 2 SQL pools you use. So I'm just going to go through and show you how to query the files now. So first of all, you can just run a T-SQL select statement to get the data out of a CSV file. And just like as we saw earlier, you can actually run a select statement across multiple CSV files as well, as you can see here. Now, to query parquet files, it's actually very similar. You just select the format to be parquet instead. And in addition to that, you can actually create statistics on top of your queries against the parquet files, and this can actually bring about a performance improvement. So you can just use this sp_create_open_row statistics, and that will create the statistics for you. And one other interesting thing I want to show you about querying using serverless SQL pools is that you can actually query delta lakes as well. So for example, I can query the delta lake that we created earlier in Databricks. And of course, sometimes it can take a while, and I have the results here. Now, something that a lot of people tend to want to do when they're using serverless SQL pools is actually create what's known as external tables. So basically, instead of having to do ad hoc queries all the time. And you can actually do this, again, using T-SQL syntax. So first here, I can specify a file format and a data source, and that will make my create external table statement a lot simpler to do. So as you can see, the data source and the file format we just specified a reference here. So if I run this, it will create the external table for me. So you can think of an external table with basically along the lines of a virtual table. It's just a pointer to the location. And this particular example is based on the popular New York City example. And then I can just run a regular select statement against the external table. Now, because of the fabric of serverless SQL pools, when you go to create a table, you can only create external tables. Create table statement will not work. So bear that in mind when you're working with serverless SQL pools. And that is it as far as the run through for how to query the files in Azure Synapse Analytics is concerned. Anyway, folks, that's the end of the video. I hope that you've all enjoyed it. I just want to say a big thanks to all of you who took the time to watch this video, plus the organisers of this year's Festive Tech Calendar. I want to remind all of you to support the Missing People's charity that this year's Festive Tech Calendar supports. And all that's left for me to say is I hope you all enjoy your holidays.